this is precisely something that people in Iran had said, that the Islamic Republic would overplay its hand. Forgive me, I'm going to use the exact word in Persian. They said, "Khariyat ahun," the foolishness of the clerics. The media really focused on the civilizational erasure bit, forgot about the bottom, where 47 years is too long and God bless the people of Iran.
It's not like, okay, there's a pause on the war, everything's okay. There's a pause on the war, and the status quo is the regime will start, executing people and continue executing people and carrying out its terror on the Iranian people.
Perhaps even in this last hour, the clerics will be more foolhardy than strategic, and they'll blow the opportunity, and the Trump administration will have the opportunity then to course correct, having shown the world that it has tried.
Hi there, it's the massacre they want you to forget. The world moved on, the massacre didn't. Look, one of the greatest casualties of this recent war has been to shift the focus of the world away from what came before. Because before the missiles and the maps, before the experts filled our CNN screens with talk of escalation, proportionality, and regional balance, there was something else that did not require interpretation or debate: mass killing. And yet in the days and weeks since a war stole the headlines, there was a dramatic shift in both discourse and the imagery into a narrative that has played into the hands of the IRGC, a narrative of complexity, competing powers, and difficult choices, but not a narrative of what actually happened. And what actually happened is that in just 2 days in January, tens of thousands of civilians were slaughtered in the streets by a murderous regime that is still in power. And it is our job as Iranians to remind the entire globe of what it will eventually come to see: one of the greatest massacres of innocent humans in recent history. Now, this war, despite rightly being something that many have wanted as a last resort to get rid of a terrorist theocracy, has also been a convenience for those who, either by intention or ignorance, support the Islamic regime. It has been used by the regime to refocus attention onto America and Israel. Almost immediately, the conditions for collective amnesia were put in place. The massacre was not entirely refuted, it was replaced by images of war, the language of escalation, and a parade of military strategists opining. Western media, almost by reflex, asked the stock questions about sovereignty, about Western interests, about the risks of regional escalation. Progressive voices, particularly in the West, returned to a well-established critique, warning of imperial overreach, cautioning against intervention, insisting on restraint. And again, these are not illegitimate concerns, but they presuppose a symmetry that doesn't exist. They assume a conventional conflict between actors on a geopolitical stage. Well, what they do not adequately account for is a regime that just days prior demonstrated a willingness to carry out mass killing against its own population at a scale that is, by any serious measure, extraordinary. It's the massacre they want you to forget. But there are moments in history when the facts as they stand are already sufficient. A regime that shuts down the internet amid widespread unrest is not attempting to clarify. A regime that can oversee the killing of tens of thousands in a matter of days is not operating within any defensible political or moral framework. And so, what are we left with now? It's not only the aftermath of violence, but the beginning of its erasure, which brings us back to responsibility that falls disproportionately to Iranians, to insist with clarity and precision on what took place, to resist the dilution of language, to refuse the premature transition to abstraction. The massacre they want you to forget is not a footnote, it is the story, and it will, in time, reassert itself as such. It's April 9, 2026. This is Roqe. Hi there, welcome to episode 429 of Roqe, Iran Rises. I'm Jian Gomeshi. Hello to you from Toronto, Canada. Salam dostan aziz, durud bar shama. Hope you're doing okay wherever you are tuning in from around the world. This is the 25th episode in our Iran Rises series, this one entitled Regime Unchanged. And once again, events inside Iran and around the Iranian diaspora, let alone the Trump Truth Social tweets alone, are moving at breakneck speed. So we should note that we are recording this episode at approximately 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time here in Toronto on this Thursday, April 9th. That's around midnight in Iran. As always, we're doing our best to share perspectives and conversations as up to date as humanly possible. Now, coming up on this 429th edition of Roqe, as a fragile ceasefire takes hold and the headlines begin to shift once again, what are we actually left with? Has anything fundamentally changed inside the Islamic Republic, or has this moment simply reinforced what many have long argued, that the structure, the ideology, and the machinery of this murderous regime remain firmly intact? How should we Iranians understand this moment, not through the lens of political messaging from Washington or Tehran, but through the lived reality of what we've just witnessed? Joining me is one of the leading analysts on Iran's security and political architecture, Senior Director of the Iran Program at the Foundation for Democracies, Defense of Democracies, a longtime researcher and policy expert focused on the Islamic Republic's internal dynamics and regional strategy. Joining us from Washington, D.C., Behnam Ben Taleblu returns to the show, one of our favorites. Let's get to it. Today's episode of Roqe is brought to you in part by Stellar Law. Stellar Law is a boutique litigation firm based in Toronto, founded and led by Rana Nosrat Panoh. The firm represents businesses and professionals in commercial and contractual disputes, particularly where relationships have broken down and the consequences are significant. Stellar Law's practice is grounded in careful analysis and strategic decision-making. Much of the work involves contract disputes, shareholder conflicts, and complex business disagreements that require both legal precision and practical judgment. Rana and her team are known for approaching these matters with clarity, focus, and a deep understanding of what is at stake for their clients. For those navigating serious disputes with real commercial impact, check out Stellar Law at stellarlaw.ca. Stellarlaw.ca. Thanks again to Rana Nosrat and the team at Stellar Law. And if you are Iranian, do note that Stellar Law operates in both English and Persian if you prefer to deal in Persian. This episode of Roqe is brought to you with the support of Famluxy. Famluxy is a cultural fashion platform dedicated to supporting and showcasing independent Iranian artists. In a time when Iranian voices and creativity face unprecedented challenges, Famluxy stands as a bridge, bringing the spirit of Iranian craftsmanship to the world. Every creation tells a story of art, culture, and individuality. By choosing Famluxy, you support independent artists and meaningful design. In 2023, Famluxy introduced its exclusive collection, Glory Days, at New York Fashion Week, featuring the King and Queen line, an artistic tribute to 2,500 years of Iranian imperial heritage and the timeless strength of our culture. You need to get one of these. If you haven't already, discover them at Famluxy. You can discover more, order more, and own your Famluxy wear at famluxy.com. Famluxy.com. Thanks to Famluxy for honoring heritage, amplifying art, and standing with Iranians. All right, let me get to our featured guest for this episode. Behnam Ben Taleblu is the Iran Program Senior Director and a Senior Fellow at FDD. That's the Foundation for Defense of Democracies in Washington. His area of expertise includes a vast range of Iran-related issues such as the IRGC, sanctions, ballistic missiles, and nuclear non-proliferation. His analysis has been quoted in prestigious publications such as the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, Reuters, the Associated Press. He's also testified before the U.S. Congress, the Canadian Parliament, and has provided testimony to the British House of Commons. Right now, Behnam Ben Taleblu joins me from Washington, D.C. Hello, sir. Welcome back.
Always great to be with you, Jian. Thanks for having me.
It's been a, by any measure, by any metric, an interesting few days, full of emotion, angst, and some deflation in the broader Iranian community. I can only imagine inside Iran as well. We're hearing two competing narratives right now, Behnam. One that says the regime survived and therefore proved its resilience. Another that says it has been exposed as weaker than ever. Which of those is closer to reality, and how should Iranians be interpreting what has just happened?
Well, there's different gradations of truth, but let me offer a slightly different formulation that I like and that I like to use and have been using. which is that the regime is weaker, but it is still lethal. Those are different things that matter to different constituencies. America can destroy a certain percentage of the ballistic missile production. Israel and America can intercept a certain number of ballistic missiles. But so long as you saw just a few days ago online, I'm sure, not just the Basij paramilitary is there, but these women in black-clad chadors with red bandanas and AK-47s and keffiyehs are also now taking to the streets as well to deter, harass, and intimidate the population from coming out in a post-conflict scenario. Then the lethality and how localized that lethality is going to look very different. So let me just say from the get-go, obviously the regime could not win a conventional military fight against America or Israel. So it was just trying to reduce the standard for victory, which is survival. But I actually believe the unfortunate, if we're going to say use the V word with this regime, the area where they scored the victory was not survival. The area where they scored the victory was in being able to manipulate the things that the West, and in particular America, cares about, and that is changing a conflict entirely rooted in security and politics into one that will be defined and gets at the risk tolerance of the West because it is now set and debated and delivered over from the perspective of energy and from the perspective of economics. And while harassing maritime shipping and closing the Strait of Hormuz are things that this regime has done and has had the ability to do and has done in a bigger way in the past, they have done comparatively more of that in this round of fighting with less. So suffice to say, they are weak, but they are still lethal. And we've seen really good evidence for both really since January.
Not only that, but you could argue they've, you don't have to argue, it's plain to see there's a PR war that's been won. No shortage of help coming from, of course, actors in the West, including those on the ideological left that are predisposed, it seems, to supporting the Islamic regime as some kind of freedom fighters, because who they're fighting is America and Israel, and that can't be tolerated by some Westerners. But they've almost completely wiped any human rights element off the table in terms of, and we're not foolish enough to think that there was a Western intervention because they care about Iranian lives, but there is a significant case to be made when tens of thousands are massacred in one of the greatest massacres in modern global history. That is not even being talked about right now. One of the greatest violations of communication in terms of the internet shutdown, not really being talked about. It gets talked about amongst Iranians in social media, of course, and I can't reach my parents, and this is a disaster, etc. But I don't see that anywhere in the Western discourse.
No, it's not even not in the Western discourse, but the imagery has changed. The imagery is entirely about the war, rather than in so many ways the most proximate crisis, which was the 3+ weeks of protests and the regime's massive and unprecedented level of barbarism against the streets by the state and its security forces just from the month of January. The discourse has entirely changed. And even with some of those, you could say, useful idiots, be it from the left or from the right, or really from any perspective, as they enter this fight politically, the imagery of January 8, January 9, that you and I know, that even many in the West know, that your audience knows, is being removed by the imagery of even just the mistakes of the US in this war. I got to tell you, like, there was a very powerful Foreign Policy is a magazine here. It's an online magazine in the States, foreignpolicy.com. They did a photo essay of the girls of the Minab school that were killed in the accidental US strike near that IRGC base at the start of the war. I got to tell you, I have real doubt that Americans know the faces of those or the names of those who were killed January 8, January 9. And all they may know is this instead, which is horrific, which is even so horrific that someone like John Bolton, no disrespect to him, but someone like John Bolton said America should apologize and America should even pay reparations for it.
Yeah.
But the problem is the left and the right are selectively zooming in on that, using that to define the entire narrative and the entire course of the war, and missing the forest through the trees here, which is this is the slaughter of the most pro-American and the most pro-Israeli population in the heartland of the Muslim Middle East. This is the slaughter of your partners and allies. This is the slaughter of really the next generation of Iran's best and brightest. And this is the turning off of the light of the people that could give you policymakers in the West and America and Canada and Australia and the UK and the EU and wherever the real path out of the region that you want rather than the crisis that keeps sucking you back into the region. So it's been really hard not just to see, but to hear the narratives coming from some people who claim to be doing in good faith, some people who are not good faith actors. But it's been really hard to hear a lot of that. And, living and working here in Washington, I got to tell you, I keep telling folks that the real war the regime is fighting is the narrative war. And I don't see America meaningfully engaging in that fight. I don't really see a lot of other Western democracies meaningfully engaging, be it with the opposition or with whatever view or whatever vector they want to take to enter this fight. They are not doing a good job on the ideological war against the Islamic Republic. And the funny thing is, that's the easiest front.
Well, the accomplices in that narrative war for the Islamic Republic regime are not just the usual suspects. That red-green alliance that we've heard so much about. The leftists will team up with the Islamists, that type of thing. They also involve, I mean, to use your term, useful idiots, if you want to use that, or extremely sharp-thinking dissenters to Trump, however you want to put it. They involve people on the right of the spectrum, well-known commentators who used to be, or up until now, have been very much in the MAGA and Trump camp. This is interesting to me, and are helping to shape that narrative, because it's if somebody on the far left says the IRGC is winning, you can, I think an American might chalk that up to, well, that's an anti-Trump voice, that's an anti-Israel voice, and that's their stake in this. But when Megyn Kelly and Tucker Carlson and Piers Morgan, all these people who have on and off been in that Trump camp say, I mean, they are all saying the IRGC has won. Are they wrong?
It depends. There's military victory and there's political victory. And the thing I've been worried about is there's no doubt American Israel can get a military victory. The challenge is just going to be at what cost, in what time horizon, and with how much risk. The harder question, and the one that I think that you and I have worked on, is how can you take whatever military victory you get and nest it into a political strategy that doesn't require you to come back and have to, forgive me for borrowing this phrase that which I don't like, but to mow the lawn militarily. And that's why when I put pen to paper in the month of February in foreign affairs, I realized I hadn't ever really put pen to paper to talk about endorsing a military option against the Islamic Republic in my entire career in that way as I had there. And that's because I was hoping that this wouldn't be a come and go and come and go and come and go, which would really erode my fear is the will on the street inside Iran, and really risk expediting the country's move into failed state status. So what some of those commentators, some of them are more good faith, some of them are more bad faith, they're looking at this changing mosaic. Some of them are rightly putting their hand on the variables. Look, the regime has a high rate of missile fire. Look, the regime was able to grow a different kind of capability during this conflict. Look, the regime was able to open a missile base. Operationally, they are hitting at a lot of the right notes, which require us to be critical about some of our own country's military performance and to push them to give us more detail. For example, when they keep giving us percents, we need to be asking for fraction. When they say we intercepted this number, you got to say, how many do you have? How many do they have? And how many did they fire? Or how many did we expend? We got to ask for the numerator denominator, not just a random percent here. We have to know what the total stockpile is to be able to come up with an independent assessment, because some on the right are just casting doubt because they don't have the full picture. And they're weaponizing that darkness along with some of that reality, that lack of information, along with some of that information, to paint the picture of America as some enfeebled, infirm military empire that cannot win against a weaker, more agile adversary. And therefore, this is the harbinger of global decline. And these declinist kind of commentaries, it's like misery loves company. These things catch on quite a bit like wildfire. But within them, there are real strains and real red lights that we, as people who focus on policy, have to pick up and identify. And one thing that I've identified is, yes, there are going to be shortages of cruise missiles. Yes, there are going to be shortages of interceptors. So turn it over to you, a skeptical crowd, people who want to focus only on China. If you don't have enough of these weapons to defend and strike the Islamic Republic, how in God's name did you think you could take on China?
All right.
If you didn't have the military industrial base to take on this third tier, non nuclear rump regime, how is it that you have been pushing for in your own discourse the China challenge? And I think there, again, that's where we can really catch some of these folks and really see what is a genuine concern versus what is just an ideological disposition versus what is a useful idiot.
We are talking about this as if it's a fait accompli. I mean, that's the kind of language we're using. I'm not necessarily projecting that onto you that you believe that, but it was only 2 days ago or that the ceasefire was announced. And I mean, most of the discourse out there right now is talking about, well, it's over, so let's sort of analyze what worked and what didn't. I'm not the expert that you are, but I am a poli-sci and history graduate who's been looking at this stuff for decades. And for me, my gut sense says this is not definitive. Not even just from a hopeful point of view of the regime will eventually fall to the Iranian people because it's so weak, etc. But from even just what's happening on the ground, it's so volatile that it's hard to actually believe unless President Trump and his cohorts are so cowed by the opposition and the economic fear-mongering that came with this that they just want an exit strategy out completely. That's sign whatever deal I have to. It just feels like there's going to be more to this story in the immediate in terms of this conflict. What is your sense telling you?
I think you hit the nail on the head. There is absolutely going to be more to this story, and not just from the street, from the perspective of us, of being different generations of the Iranian diaspora living and working here in the West, but from the perspective of the things that the West cares about, which is the state battle, the state competition, and the state interests. I mean, America and Iran were worlds apart on those issues, whether you look at what is reported to be Trump's 15 points or what is purported to be Iran's 10-point counter. They were worlds apart on the principles and on the policies behind those things before this conflict began. I imagine that the conflict did not unite them in that. I imagine the conflict accelerated the growth and the distance between these two countries over those issues, over those policies, over those principles. So there is no way that even like a bad deal like the JCPOA, which was nuclear only, which took about 2.5, 3 years to get, there's no way that a better deal, an actual end to this crisis, will come about in this 2-week ceasefire period.
So then, what's the ceasefire about? Is
the ceasefire is both sides just catching their breath? Here's one question I'd like to put out there: is Trump has only struck Iran during periods of negotiations. That's just something worth putting out there, by the way, and keeping in the ether. I mean, this is someone who likes both the element of surprise and the path dependency of let's bring them to the table and let's strike them at the same time. So never say never with this president, because he has strategically cultivated ambiguity, uncertainty, fear, and doubt, both among allies as well as adversaries. And we've seen the Islamic Republic lead with his chin and overplay its hand and get struck in the middle of negotiations. I certainly think that is a low probability but high impact situation, perhaps with what could come after Saturday. But both sides, I think, are ready to continue the fight. And if there is no optimal or suboptimal agreement for not an end state resolution like a peace agreement, but even just a ceasefire and deconfliction, the fire will start again for sure. But there is a kernel of truth in what you said at the front end, which is, I think, because this president is an all options on the table kind of president, and he does worry bigger and broader about things that that hasn't immediately oriented and animated traditional American presidents. The market looms large for President Trump, and I think that's where the Islamic Republic was able to asymmetrically play its hand well. Unfortunately, I mean, it has only put a reported 10 to 12 mines in the Strait of Hormuz, yet it's totally changed the dynamic there. I mean, the Iran-Iraq war, the regime did much more dangerous, much more risky things, and the U.S. military cut right through them. This is a fundamentally different kind of threat the Islamic Republic has been able to have and to weaponize because it's had market forces, firms, businesses amplify the concerns. So it's not about how can Trump take on Iran. It's how can Trump deal with this large kind of international private sector that has these kind of lingering and sticky concerns about the Strait of Hormuz. And I think that's been the real challenge for the president, which is why he, as the stronger power, has been willing to opt for other things at this time. And I think that is one reason why he may have been seen as being more interested in a ceasefire than the Islamic Republic. So just might sound contradictory, but food for thought.
He's not a monolith either, even beyond the international pressure in his home camp. I mean, he's got a lot of people who are seemingly lacking in any enthusiasm for this continuation, including his vice president, who, there's general agreement that the word is that he wants a way out of this and is eyeing 2028 as a presidential candidate and doesn't want a lousy war on his record.
So my view is a little bit different on this, just as an American having a front row seat in Washington to this issue. And I'll tell you that there's differences between MAGA, you could say broadly, and America First conceptually and philosophically. And I think when it comes to MAGA, the broader base, at least with respect to polling here in the United States among registered Republicans and people who identify as MAGA, it kind of is the inverse of the Nixon line, where if the president does it, it's not illegal. In this case, it's if the president does it, then therefore by definition it is MAGA. It is more political than policy or philosophy. Some of the America First folks, if you want to segment it out and draw a slight, perhaps a difference without a distinction, is they will be the ones who will feel betrayed by this conflict and the perpetual linking the perpetual war to the endless war discourse that has animated much of this movement in the past. But there is a difference there, and I want the audience to know that. And that difference is louder and more pronounced, forgive me, Jian, in the podcast world and in the non-traditional media world, and is on the ascendant in terms of the youth demographics who identify with these views and values, but has not therefore taken up the Republican establishment, nor do they seem to represent the base of the voters of registered Republicans, which is also something to take into account here. So how does that impact the president and the war? I still don't think that the coalition politics matters for the president anywhere as much as the energy market and the financial side of this thing. And another reason for which I say that is because, well, I think the president might even be okay. This is my crazy personal view. He might even be okay with losing the midterms. If the president loses the midterms, the thing that is taken away from him is a big legislative agenda. He, in term one, had only one big bill, the tax bill. He, in term two, has had the big, beautiful bill. He has a separate bill he's interested in now. There's a real question as to how much of the president's own personal political capital is he going to expend on this. Right. And I actually think he knows he is better in opposition. And I actually think that if some of the support erodes, potentially because of the war, potentially because of the economy, potentially because of anything else, the president is the one who is able to actually push away from the table on this more than the party. And if you look at the trend line, sometimes Republicans tend not to win these things. And in general, Republican incumbents tend not to win these sorts of midterm contests anyway. So a lot of very interesting trends here, which if I'm going to look at Trump and his ability to kind of gamble and play to win on this, I think he may even do a victory for the MAGA base and say, hey, look, we might even have a cabinet shakeup after a midterm or a parliamentary defeat after November. But I think someone like Trump is going to be more interested in the market reaction than the coalition politics. Okay. The Republican Party, the elite, the White House will be interested in the coalition politics, but I think the president and his brand more interested in the former than the latter.
So let's move, if we move from Trump and the American politics and pundits and people to the Iranian community, the global Iranian community, the diaspora, and folks inside Iran, although unfortunately we haven't been able to hear from them as much other than from phone calls that we're lucky enough to get from some friends and family there. I feel like if we recap the last 3 months, the 4 months, there was this period of, first of all, there was some general excitement that, okay, something's happening, the Bazaris are out, could this be the time, etc. Then there was the euphoria of there's giant demonstrations. Then there was the desperate horror of learning about and seeing the massacres. And then there was, where's the world, don't stop talking about Iran, we need media attention. And then there was this period where it was please bring intervention, help the people of Iran. And that translated into another round of euphoria when that began, particularly because it began and then Khamenei was killed. And it felt like this was all on track and to some sort of victory that Iranians have dreamed about for decades. I wonder in that moment where there felt like amongst a global Iranian community, top to bottom, smart, old, young, geographically diverse, there was this intention or this aspiration that fundamental change is around the corner. That because of that aspiration, when things have happened as they have this past week, there's been this disappointment where maybe it was premature to think things would turn out in terms of the way we had hoped, the regime collapsing or, the return of Reza Pahlavi or whatever it might be in an interim period. Do you think there's anything to that? In other words, Iranians got a little too excited about what could happen.
Potentially, but I wouldn't want to diminish it like that either. I would just say the ferocity of emotion, whether it was the ferocity of the hope or of the euphoria or of the desperation and of the disenchantment, the ferocity of the emotional roller coaster is one not to downplay, both inside Iran and outside Iran. Every day is an entirely different emotional roller coaster, if you even care one iota about the fate of the people and the fate of that country. And so I don't fault them for dancing the day. Someone asked me, did you go to that big thing in DC when Khamenei died and so many Iranians were dancing in the street? I said, no, I took a breath and went back to my job because it was a busy work day, even though it was a Saturday. But I don't fault people at all for that. In fact, I can understand because they're driven to that emotional roller coaster by years, if not decades, of failed policy in Iran, where if you starve someone, even just a piece of bread will feel like a Thanksgiving dinner. And to that end, there was real reason for a lot of hope. But what I will tell the population, in particular, the population outside the country today, is that there is still real reason for hope. But we have to be very measured. We have to be very calculated. Political capital is something you don't want to waste, but you don't want to let it expire either at the same time. And we have to keep our eyes and ears trained on the ground in Iran, think what's best for the countries that we live in, and how to align those two things, the public good with the American or the Canadian or the whatever national interest, and find a way to really be the best advocate and be the best brand ambassador and keep the hope alive while also being as realistic as possible. It's not that we shouldn't revel in these moments, but it's to realize that this is a process, that we are not trying to achieve an end state. We are trying to go through steps in a process. And I know that can be a tall order, particularly if folks in diaspora come from families that are dissidents or are dissidents themselves or have seen firsthand the trauma of the Islamic Republic, have been in protests or have family members that have. But this is the great test now of our community. Can we translate the pain and can we translate the emotional roller coaster into impact, into sobriety, and into policy influence? Because I think that is going to be the task, because ultimately it is going to be up to Iranians. The war has shown that. The protest has shown that. The past 47 years has shown that. And wherever this moves next, whether we feel good or bad. I mean, I got to tell you, my mother has been riding this emotional coaster like no one's business, and she knows things that are breaking, even though she doesn't even use the internet that much. She knows them much more than I do.
Yeah, my mom too.
Firsthand riding this thing, and to which I always say, wait, zoom out.
Look,
maybe I have the luxury of that, of someone being born here.
No, that's listen. I echo. That's exactly, in fact, my mantra. And people who listen to this program have heard me say this almost every program in the last couple of weeks, at least. Has been, let's not be day traders about this. Don't get too excited by one Truth Social post or too down by one video of a bomb or somebody chirping on TV or whatever. Just zoom out and kind of. And I think that's where the message of the Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi was yesterday. He put out this video kind of saying, hey, everybody, calm down, zoom out. And his message was be patient. Of course, there's a difficult side of that, which is that this isn't a zero-sum game. It's not like, okay, there's a pause on the war, everything's okay. There's a pause on the war, and the status quo is the regime will start, executing people and continue executing people and carrying out its terror on the Iranian people. So part of the angst comes from, do we even have the ability to be patient, because we know the atrocities that are going to take place in real time. Let me ask you, because I know I can't keep you forever, and I want to cover a couple of things before I let you go. So much of this, part of the narrative or part of the conversations we've been hearing for the last couple of months, and I'll grant you that some of this is just speculation, the way people speculate on Ben Affleck's love life, they speculate on Israel and what's Bibi saying to Trump. But part of the idea that I heard is that whatever the U.S.'s intentions and commitment to seeing this through, if that means a real end to the regime, Israel is committed to that. And to really seeing this through. So where is Israel right now in all of this for you?
Well, Israel also, very fascinating, is a kaleidoscope of a state and a kaleidoscope of a society. Sometimes where you stand in life depends on where you sit and vice versa. And I do see that in Israel. There's no shortage of hawkishness on the issue of the Islamic Republic, particularly post 10/7, particularly post the atrocities of 10/7, which many rightly connect the dots on to the patron of Hamas, which is the government of the Islamic Republic of Iran. And I really do think zooming out of Israel's regional wars in response to 10/7, in response to the slow, steady incursion of the Iran threat network towards Israel's borders for so many years, and the ability of the regime to exploit the gray zone, and the Israelis just pushing away from the table and going overt and conventional and forcing the Iranians to have to play catch up to keep up. I think there is a philosophy change. And the question is, how long will it take for this philosophy to be translated into strategy and into policy and to have real world impact?
What's the philosophy change?
That they're going to go from, managing the problem to we got to solve the problem.
Okay.
They're stepping back and, okay, we're going to fight them in the gray zone and it's the shadow war, to no, we got to take the fight to these.
Well, can they take the fight if America is doing a deal?
Well, the question is right now, will America even force them to turn off the fight in Lebanon? Just a few hours ago it was breaking that the State Department will be having negotiations between the Lebanese and the Israelis next week here in Washington, D.C. And that was actually a demand that the Islamic Republic had. So the trend line in the very, very short term is that America's desire for this ceasefire is genuine. But the enmity the Islamic Republic has with Israel is also genuine and deep-seated. And the willingness of Israel to try to find other ways to continue this fight is also genuine, because this is existential for them. And they know, and they need to know, and have been knowing in different scale and scope and intensity, that really one of their few partners on this planet, I want to stress, on this planet, are the Iranian people, both in the diaspora and more importantly, inside Iran proper today. They understand that. They've seen the imagery, they know the chants, they know the voices. So what I say to them, I'll say publicly here, is we can have the premature victory lap of Israel settles for a weakened, defanged Islamic Republic, potentially even a semi-failed state. But please know that that only vindicates the talking point of the worst anti-Semites, beyond the Tucker Carlsons of the world, where they come out and they say, oh, Israel is just trying to do this to weaken states in the region because they can't handle strong states. No, the Israeli-Iranian friendship among the people, among the societies, could be the building block for a better order. And this is not some pipe dream. There's many in Israel who do believe that. The question is, will they be afforded the longer time horizon to be able to help actualize that? And I think on balance, yes, because it is such an interest. I mean, Israel needs a partner in the region. America is, its footprint, its interests are fast changing in the region. And Israel needs a partner. And there is a real way to build a partner for peace in an era when societies in that region are breaking down. Yes, you have the Abraham Accords, but you don't have the rapid expansion of it. You have potentially NATO ally Turkey moving in to take in the role of the next most lethal and risky challenge to the Israelis. And you're going to need a partner. And I actually think that there is light at the end of the tunnel. We just don't know how long this tunnel is. And I'm using this analogy intentionally here because this is a Shimon Peres quote that I just paraphrased, which is, "There's light at the end of the tunnel, but there is no tunnel."
Oh, interesting. The last time you were on this program, it was about a month ago, and I asked you, how can all of these strikes, the war had just begun, I think, and I sort of said, well, how can this get to a point where what we've all hoped would be the case, and where something that Donald Trump had even echoed, and certainly the Crown Prince, etc., get to a point where the Iranian people feel the agency and the security to get back in the streets and finish the job, so to speak, end this revolution or commit this revolution to getting rid of this regime. And you talked about the fact that there needs to be a phase two, that there's the defanging of the military apparatus of this Islamic Republic and its ability to attack other countries, et cetera. But then there has to be a phase two that addresses the domestic suppression apparatus. That needs to be slowly dismantled or quickly dismantled in order for people to feel like they can get back in the streets. Does this ceasefire, do the events of the last few days put that phase two in great peril?
Some would say it expedites it. Others would say it confounds it. For me, it's still TBD because I want to see how Saturday goes. I want to see how these indirect U.S.-Iran talks go. But I'll tell you this. My preference is that phase two be nested into phase one. So what does that mean? If phase one is the military targeting, my preference is if you're going to go from targeting the regime, the missiles, the defense industrial base, the production centers, the IRGC facilities, the Islamic Republic's naval capabilities, all of the military and kinetic stuff, while you have this air campaign underway, that's phase one. Phase two would be having meaningfully defanged and degraded those capabilities while the air campaign is going on to target more intensely the Basij, the IRGC, the law enforcement forces, even the paramilitaries, and even the foreign Shia militias on Iranian soil. The bases, the compounds, and things the Israelis were doing for the past 2 weeks, strafing even tents where some of the Basij folks had left buildings to go into. These are the kinds of things that I think we need simply more time for. So if your question is, what does the ceasefire do to this? It shrinks the aerial operations window, and it forces whatever was done against the security forces.
It shrinks it or ends it? Doesn't it end?
It shrinks it or ends it depending on what happens on Saturday.
Right.
If there's a collapse in talks and Trump starts shooting in, then certainly the Israelis will be active again. But let's take the worst case, it ends it, then it moves all of that stuff into the realm of covert action or underground, which can get pretty dicey pretty quickly, but is high risk, high reward. I mean, it depends. The Israelis have had a lot of success in terms of covert action against the regime's nuclear and missile program. But how do we flip the script and use that against the paramilitaries, use that against really the national security deep state in that country, if that's something that they're interested in doing? But this is what we're talking about in terms of Israel still keeping its eye trained on the Islamic Republic rather than pushing away from the table and taking a victory lap. Because if this is all about containing the regime, right? You've defanged them. How do you now solidify that? And you solidify that by making sure that the regime can't do what most authoritarians do when they lose a war, which is turn the guns trained abroad to the guns trained at home.
Okay. An almost final question for you, second last question for you. I think one of the issues for those who have been supporting intervention or the war, whatever we want to call it, the bombings, including those inside Iran, is that the support for that was usually accompanied by some knowledge or some expectation that what was being bombed were targets of the Islamic Republic regime or the IRGC, etc. And I mean, I personally know folks in Iran who said, oh yeah, there was a bombing across the street, but it was a good thing. We liked it because we know that that's, an IRGC hangout or something like that. Trump raised that bar in kind of a histrionic way with this, first with the power plants and talk of hitting that kind of infrastructure, but then with the end of civilization stuff that many can just park in the pantheon of things that Trump says, in social media, but it seems to have raised the stakes so that for people who want a continuation of that intervention or that war, they then suddenly face accusations of, so you're ready for the end of civilization. You're supporting this, the power plants being blown up that will affect hospitals, etc. What is your response to somebody who says that?
And not to be glib about it, because I think those comments are really incorrect and irresponsible. And just again, as an Iranian American, I think
Trump's comments, you mean?
Yeah, it's still, because again, even zooming out, I mean, there was no social time to do this, but I wanted to tweet that day because how did the tweet end? Do you remember, Jian, or the post end? It ended with "God bless the people of Iran."
Yeah.
So even within then, there was an internal contradiction.
Yes.
The media really focused on the civilizational erasure bit, forgot about the bottom where 47 years is too long and God bless the people of Iran. So again, even there was a way to autocorrect or re-edit that tweet to say the Islamist autocracy of the Islamic Republic or the civilization, quote unquote, of the Islamic Republic. But all of those are missing the forest of the trees here, because when you talk about civilization and you put it into the context of bombing, it is just reprehensible, full stop, and it should not be coming from the democratically elected leader of a free world, who in particular has been better than his predecessors on standing with the Iranian people in principle and in practice. That's what hurts the most about that tweet, or the post, I should say. That is what hurts the most. So how do we respond to somebody? How would I respond to somebody? I would say, unfortunately, no one has done a better job. And here it might sound tongue-in-cheek, and here it might come with the luxury of distance, me sitting here. But it is nonetheless also what I've heard from people in Iran, and for people who have left Iran increasingly over the past 20 years. I'm not talking just dissidents and defectors. I'm talking normal people, doctors, lawyers, engineers, university students, the people who've come here for a better life in the past 2 decades, rather than just straight up political refugees. But they say that it is, in sincerity, it is the Islamic Republic that is destroying civilization in Iran. Full stop. It is the Islamic Republic continuing to stay at the helm that has brought Iran closer than ever before to being a failed state. Full stop. This doesn't justify or explain even some of the kind of targeting that we've seen in the past 6 weeks of war, and God forbid what would be scaled up if Trump actually chose to deliver on some of those tweets or posts. But it does help to contextualize that is coming in the context of a war, versus what we've seen in the context of 47 years of the Islamic Republic. This is a regime that has inflicted these wounds on its state, on its society, on its people themselves. I mean, in the month of January, amid the protests, as you remember, FDD, the organization I work for, we had 2 great colleagues. One is Iranian American, and one is American, helped to put together data on all of the environmental disasters in Iran from the end of the 12-day war to the start of the protests in late December. Over 60, I think 62 different instances. And we released it during the protests. People said, what in God's name are you doing talking about the environment during protests? I said, these protests at some point will end. It's a dynamic interactive map. You can find it. But I want people to know the multivaried reasons that the Iranian people went out into the street. And one reason is they understand that their government is moving them closer to failed state status better and faster than any Western policy could. And that recognition is so real in the minds of the Iranian population that they were willing to entertain the costs and the risks en masse of supporting foreign intervention because they knew the costs of staying silent and staying the course with their own government at home. And that's the real tragedy.
A final question to you. I mean, you've talked about Saturday and these meetings between the representatives of the Islamic Republic and the U.S., et cetera. What do you most hope to see? I mean, you work for an organization that's got democracy in its title. What do you most hope to see in the coming days? What would be the best case scenario in the next week?
Well, unfortunately, I know the best case scenario, given the track record of this regime, is not possible, but it is something that somehow, as someone who got his start in this business a little over 2 decades ago, wanting there to be peace, not war, by the way, um, is I hope that the Islamic Republic can actually close this chapter on itself. Nobody negotiates, not just, I'm talking not surrender here, nobody negotiates themselves out of existence. But after 47 years of tumult and turbulence and turmoil, I think the only way the Islamic Republic could meaningfully pay a debt back to Iranian society and to Iranian state, of which this is just one very turbulent chapter in terms of our civilizational history, if we're going to get there, by the way, uh, is to be willing to close the door, to look at the disservice they've done to the faith that they proclaim to have, to look at the disservice they've done to the country that they purport to represent, and in terms of the people that they claim to represent. And to that end, the great hope would be, America puts forward terms of surrender and get some of these folks out, and there's a negotiated transition. That's what I would love to see. I don't think that's possible. Unfortunately, the Islamic Republic is going to make you burn through things to get them. So my fear is here, how can we limit the damage? And instead, my hope is, how can America hold strong, know what it wants from this regime, both in principle and in practice, not to settle for any kind of negotiating gimmick, because this is a regime that is stronger at the negotiating table than it is at the battlefield. And to, even if, God forbid, we do fall for a trick here or there, to take solace in the fact that as strong as the regime may be at the negotiating table, the trend line is that they also do overplay their hands. And this is the reverse. Sometimes people have been calling in from Iran during the month of March and the month of January, and I have had the luxury of sitting in on some calls with the permission of the people who are back in Iran, just to hear what people are saying. And I've asked them, just so that they don't even have any affiliation to me or my voice or my organization or anything else, I've given them a list of questions. One question I had asked, and to have my friend, ask it live on the phone and get to hear the response live is, well, what are you afraid of? And I would I listed the things I was afraid of, and what are you hopeful for? And this is precisely something that people in Iran had said, that the Islamic Republic would overplay its hand. Forgive me, I'm going to use the exact word in Persian. They said, "Khariyat ahund," the foolishness of the clerics. Perhaps even in this last hour, the clerics will be more foolhardy than strategic, and they'll blow the opportunity, and the Trump administration will have the opportunity then to course correct, having shown the world that it has tried. So I'll leave you with that with that very salient, direct line about what some internally folks may be hopeful for.
I actually don't think that's that far off. No, personally, I mean, I think that they, you know, there's every chance that the regime, it's funny, we toggle as Iranians, I always say this in the diaspora especially, we toggle between talking about the regime as these bumbling, Keystone Cop asses, to, on the other hand, we say they're really smart, they're savvy, they know what they're doing, they know how to do this, and both are true in some ways. You sort of see them both play out, and you never know which one's going to rear its head. So I'm very grateful for the hour that you've given us, and for your insights. I know it's a lot harder to come in and do an interview on a week like this when everything's up in the air than in a quote unquote normal period where you can sort of just bring us what you've learned and what you've been teaching for many years. So thank you for the insights and for taking the time.
That's always a pleasure. Thank you for doing what you do, and great to be on with you and the team. Merci.
Khodafis. Merci.
Khodafis.
All right, a big thank you again to Behnam Ben Taleblu, always an insightful guest. Always gets my mind buzzing with ideas when he's on the show. I'm sure for many of you, your minds are buzzing as well. If you want to respond, critique, comment, compliment, by all means, you can do so anytime. Our email address is info@roqemedia.com, info@roqemedia.com, or of course you can post on any or all of our platforms. Just be civil, even when you're critiquing. This is full time for today for this edition of our Iran Rises series. Thanks to the amazing team who put this show together twice a week during this series. Super Parisa Sanjarani, Savi Rohan Mahur, and the photo and video queen Tina Farahi. Special thanks to our extended Roqe family of Smart Pega, Charming Kimia, Talented Anahita, The Rising Kion, and Methodical Kaveh. Thank you to all of you out there for supporting us and sharing our content. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already. You're welcome to subscribe on any or all of our platforms for free. That would be YouTube or Telegram or Apple, Spotify, CastBox. You can find the show on Instagram at Roqe Media. You can find me on Instagram at Jian Gomeshi. And as ever, in the immortal words of my late Uncle Behnam, Mizun Bashi.